The night Colt Reeves killed a man to save his wife, he learned something the law never taught him. Justice doesn't wait for a badge. What started as a practical arrangement between strangers in the frozen desert became a war that changed everything. A hardened rancher, a fearless teacher from back east, and a violent drifter who refused to let them live in peace. This is a story about survival, defiance, and the brutal choices that forge legends in unforgiving land. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind off the high desert cut like broken glass. Colt Reeves stood on the platform at Ashford Station with his collar turned up and his hat pulled low, watching the empty rails stretch into darkness. His breath came out in short white bursts. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and the sky looked mean, low clouds the color of old iron, moving fast. He checked his watch. 20 minutes late. The train was always late. He'd driven 3 hours through backcountry roads that barely qualified as roads at all, left his ranch in the hands of a foreman he only half trusted, and now he was standing in the cold waiting for a woman he'd never seen. A woman whose letters were formal and precise, whose handwriting suggested education and restraint, whose reasons for coming west were vague enough to make him wonder if this was a mistake. But he'd given his word. That still meant something out here. Maybe one of the few things that did. The station was little more than a wooden shelter with a rusted roof and a single bench that nobody used. No ticket office. No attendant. Just a faded sign that said Ashford, in letters that were peeling away one season at a time. Beyond the platform, the town itself was barely visible. A scatter of lights in the distance, dim and unwelcoming. Colt had lived in this part of the territory for most of his adult life. He knew its rhythms, knew when to push and when to pull back. Knew that survival here wasn't about strength. It was about patience and timing, and the willingness to do what needed doing without asking permission. He'd learned that the hard way. The rails began to hum. He straightened, scanning the horizon. A single headlight appeared in the distance, cutting through the gloom. The locomotive came on slow, dragging a string of passenger cars that looked older than the land itself. Steam poured from the engine in ragged bursts, and the brakes screamed as it pulled into the station. Colt stepped back from the edge of the platform. The train lurched to a stop. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a conductor appeared at the rear car, a wiry man with a sour expression, and kicked down the steps. "Ashford!" he called out, though there was no one else around to hear it. A figure appeared in the doorway. Colt's first thought was that she didn't look like someone fleeing anything. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with dark hair pinned up under a gray traveling hat. She wore a long coat that was too clean for this part of the world, and she carried a single leather case in one hand. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady. She stepped down onto the platform and looked directly at him. "Mr. Reeves?" Her voice was clear, without the breathlessness or hesitation he'd expected. "That's right." She nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already decided. "Eliza Hart." He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." The conductor tossed down 2 more cases and a trunk, barely waiting for them to hit the ground before climbing back aboard. The train lurched forward, steam hissing, and within seconds it was gone, leaving only the smell of coal smoke and the echo of wheels on iron. They stood there in the silence that followed. Colt studied her without making it obvious. She was younger than he'd pictured, early 30s maybe. There were lines around her eyes, the kind that came from squinting at books in poor light, or staying up too late thinking. Her hands were bare, and he noticed she wasn't wearing a ring. "Cold tonight," he said finally. "It is." "You bring warmer clothes?" "I did." "Good. It gets worse." She smiled faintly, as if he'd just told a joke she didn't quite believe. "I'm sure I'll manage." He picked up the trunk, heavier than it looked, and gestured toward the wagon parked at the edge of the platform. "This way." She followed without hesitation, carrying the 2 cases herself. He appreciated that. A lot of women who came out here expected men to do everything for them, and then acted surprised when the land chewed them up and spit them out. The wagon was old but functional, hitched to a pair of draft horses that stood patient in the cold. Colt loaded the trunk into the back and held out a hand for the cases. Eliza handed them over, then climbed up onto the bench without waiting for help. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Town's about 10 miles south," he said. "Ranch is another 15 past that. We'll stop at the hotel tonight, get you settled. Tomorrow, I'll take you out to see the place." "That's fine." He clicked his tongue and the horses started forward, hooves crunching over frozen dirt. The wind picked up as they left the station behind, and Colt pulled his coat tighter. They rode in silence for the first mile. Eliza didn't fidget or make small talk. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll past. Low hills covered in sagebrush, the occasional stand of juniper twisted by wind. The sky was beginning to spit snow, tiny flakes that melted as soon as they touched the ground. "You've been out here long?" she asked eventually. 15 years. That's a long time. Long enough. Do you like it? He thought about that. I don't think about it much. It's where I am. She nodded, as if that made sense to her. I read about the territory before I came. The newspapers back east make it sound like the frontier's disappearing. They're not wrong. Towns are growing. Rail lines are spreading. Give it another 10 years and this'll all be farmland and fences. And you don't want that? Doesn't matter what I want. It's coming either way. She looked at him, and for a moment he felt the weight of her scrutiny. Not judgment, something sharper. Curiosity, maybe. Or assessment. "You don't talk much, do you?" she said. "Not usually." "That's fine. I've had enough talk to last a lifetime." He almost smiled at that. They reached the outskirts of Ashford just after 9. The town was bigger than the station suggested, maybe 300 people, most of them clustered around a main street lined with wood-frame buildings. There was a general store, a bank, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, and a church that looked like it had been built by someone who'd never seen a church before. The hotel was at the far end of the street, a 2-story structure with a sagging porch and a sign that read, Ashford House, in faded gold letters. Colt pulled the wagon up front and set the brake. "Wait here." He climbed down and went inside. The lobby was small and dimly lit, smelling of old wood and lamp oil. A clerk sat behind the desk, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, who looked up as Colt approached. "Need a room for the night," Colt said. The clerk glanced past him toward the wagon. "Just you?" "And a lady." The clerk raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He turned the register around and slid a pen across the desk. Colt signed his name and paid in cash. "Room 6. Upstairs, end of the hall." Colt took the key and went back outside. Eliza was already down from the wagon, standing beside it with her cases. He grabbed the trunk and led the way inside. The room was basic: a bed, a chair, a washstand with a cracked mirror. The wallpaper was peeling in one corner, and the floorboards creaked underfoot. But it was warm, and the bed looked clean. Colt set the trunk down by the door. "Breakfast is at 7. I'll meet you downstairs." Eliza looked around the room, then back at him. "This is fine. Thank you." He nodded and turned to leave. "Mr. Reeves." He stopped in the doorway. "I appreciate what you're doing," she said. "I know this arrangement isn't conventional. It's practical. That's enough." She studied him for a moment, and he had the strange sense that she was seeing past whatever walls he kept up. "Still, thank you." He touched his hat and left. Colt didn't sleep well that night. He'd taken a room at the other end of the hall, but the bed felt wrong, the sounds of the town filtering in through thin walls. He lay awake listening to boots on the boardwalk outside, the occasional shout from one of the saloons, the wind rattling the window frames. He kept thinking about the woman in the other room. He'd answered her ad 3 months ago, more out of necessity than anything else. The ranch was doing well enough, but it was too much work for one man, and the few hands he could afford didn't stick around long. He needed someone who could manage the house, keep the books, maybe help with the day-to-day decisions that piled up faster than he could handle them. A wife made sense, a partner. But he hadn't expected someone like Eliza Hart. The women who usually answered those ads were desperate. Widows with no money, daughters with no prospects, women running from debts or scandals or bad marriages. They came west because they had nowhere else to go. Eliza didn't seem desperate. She seemed deliberate. That worried him more than he wanted to admit. Morning came cold and bright. Colt was downstairs at 6:30, drinking coffee in the hotel's dining room when Eliza appeared. She changed into a simpler dress, dark blue with a high collar, and her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She looked rested. "Morning," she said. He stood. "Morning. Sleep all right?" "Well enough." They ate breakfast in near silence. Eggs, biscuits, bacon that was more fat than meat. The coffee was terrible, but Colt drank it anyway. Across the table, Eliza ate with the same quiet efficiency she seemed to bring to everything. When they finished, he settled the bill and they went back out to the wagon. The ride to the ranch took just over an hour. The road was rough, winding through low hills dotted with scrub and the occasional creek bed that ran dry most of the year. Snow had fallen overnight, a thin dusting that turned the landscape ghostly. Eliza didn't ask many questions, but she watched everything: the way the land rolled, the placement of fence lines, the condition of the roads. Colt found himself explaining things without meaning to. "That creek floods in the spring," he said, pointing to a gully off to the left. "Lost 2 calves in it last year." "Is there a way to divert it?" "Probably. Haven't had time to try." She nodded, filing the information away. They crested a rise and the ranch came into view. It wasn't much to look at. A main house built from rough-cut lumber, single-story with a wide porch. A barn twice the size of the house. A handful of outbuildings: bunkhouse, smokehouse, tool shed. Corrals stretched out behind the barn, and beyond that, open range as far as the eye could see. Colt pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "This is it." Eliza climbed down, moving slowly, taking it all in. She walked up onto the porch, testing the boards, then turned and looked back at the land. "How many acres?" 1,600, about half of it's grazing land. The rest is too rocky." "How many head of cattle?" 200 and change, sold off a bunch last fall." She nodded. "And you run this yourself?" "Got a foreman and 3 hands. They're out checking fence lines today." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Then she looked at him. "Can I see inside?" He opened the door. The interior was as plain as the exterior. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, 2 bedrooms in the back. The furniture was sparse: a table, a few chairs, a bookshelf with maybe a dozen volumes. Everything was clean but worn, the kind of place that got used hard and mended when it broke. Eliza walked through slowly, running her hand along the edge of the table, glancing into the bedrooms. She didn't say anything, and Colt found himself trying to see it through her eyes. It wasn't much. He knew that. But it was his. She came back into the main room and faced him. "It's solid. Built it myself. Took 2 summers. I can tell." She paused. "What do you need from me, Mr. Reeves?" He'd been expecting the question, but it still caught him off guard. "I need someone who can keep this place running when I'm not here. Someone who can handle the books, manage supplies, make decisions when they need making. And in return, you'll have a home, security, a share in what this place becomes. And if it doesn't work out, then you leave. I'm not looking to trap anyone." She nodded slowly. "That's fair." They stood there in the silence, the weight of the arrangement settling between them. "I'll need a few days to get settled," Eliza said finally. "But I'm willing to try." "All right." She extended her hand and he shook it. Her grip was firm, her palm cool. "One more thing," she said. "I'd like to start a school." He blinked. "A school?" "There's no school in Ashford. I saw that yesterday. Children need education." "Boss, there's maybe 10 kids in the whole town." "That's 10 more than 0. He studied her, trying to figure out if she was serious. "You know how to teach?" "I was a teacher for 8 years. I know how to teach." "All right. If you can make it work, I won't stop you." She smiled, and for the first time since she'd stepped off the train, it reached her eyes. Good. The first week passed in a blur of small adjustments. Eliza moved into the second bedroom and spent the first 2 days organizing the house with a precision that bordered on ruthless. She cleaned out cabinets, rearranged shelves, threw out half the clutter Colt had accumulated over the years. He didn't argue. The place needed it. She took over the books, going through months of records with a sharp eye. Within 3 days, she'd found 2 accounting errors and a supplier who'd been overcharging him for grain. "You've been paying 15% too much." she told him one evening over dinner. Colt looked up from his plate. For how long? At least 6 months. Maybe longer. He set down his fork. Damn. I'll write them a letter. They'll correct it or lose your business. He almost laughed. You think they'll care? They will if enough people complain, and I'll make sure they do. She wasn't bluffing. By the end of the week, she'd sent letters to 3 other ranchers in the area, alerting them to the same issue. 2 of them wrote back thanking her. The supplier sent a terse apology and a credit. Colt found himself watching her more than he meant to. She moved through the house like someone who'd been there for years, not days. She didn't ask permission for small things, just did them. She rearranged the furniture in the main room to catch more light. She started a vegetable garden plot behind the house, even though it was too early to plant. She fixed a loose hinge on the front door that Colt had been meaning to get to for months. And she didn't complain. Not once. The hands noticed. Ray Whitcomb, the foreman, was the first to say something. He was a wiry man in his 50s, weathered and practical, with a mustache that drooped past his chin. She's different, he said one afternoon while they were mending fence. Colt hammered in a post. Different how? Most women come out here. They spend the first month crying or trying to leave. She acts like she's been here forever. Maybe she's just stubborn. Ray grinned. Maybe. But stubborn's good out here. Colt didn't disagree. Tit. The town took longer to warm up. Ashford wasn't hostile exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was the kind of place where newcomers were measured by what they contributed, not who they were. And a woman arriving alone, marrying a rancher she'd never met, and immediately talking about starting a school, that raised eyebrows. Eliza didn't seem to care. She went into town twice that first week, once for supplies and once to talk to the mayor about the school. The mayor was a round man named Porter who ran the general store and seemed to think his title gave him more authority than it did. A school, he said, leaning back in his chair behind the counter. That's ambitious. It's necessary, Eliza replied. We've got a church. Reverend Calloway teaches the kids to read on Sundays. Once a week isn't enough. They need regular instruction. Porter scratched his chin. And who's going to pay for it? I will, at least to start. If the town wants to contribute later, that's fine, but I don't need permission to teach. He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. Suit yourself, but don't expect folks to line up. People out here don't trust strangers. Then I'll earn their trust. She did. Within 2 weeks, she'd secured a small building on the edge of town, a former storage shed that had been sitting empty for years. It wasn't much, but it had 4 walls and a roof. She cleaned it out, brought in a stove, built desks out of scrap lumber. The first day she opened, 3 children showed up. By the end of the month, there were 9. Colt didn't see much of her during the days. She left early for the school and came back in the evenings, tired but energized in a way he didn't fully understand. She'd talk over dinner about what the kids were learning, the progress they were making, the challenges she was facing. He found himself looking forward to those conversations. She asked him about the ranch, too, not in the polite, disinterested way most people did, but with genuine curiosity. She wanted to know how the cattle business worked, what the risks were, what decisions kept him up at night. You're thinking about expanding, she said one evening. He looked at her surprised. What makes you say that? You've been checking the fence lines more than usual, and you asked Ray about water rights last week. You pay attention. I do. He set down his coffee. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. There's a piece of land to the north, about 400 acres. Owner died last year and his widow's looking to sell. Good grazing, year-round water. Can you afford it? Barely. I'd have to take on debt. Is it worth it? He thought about that. Depends on the market. If cattle prices hold, yeah. If they drop, I'm in trouble. What's your gut say? My gut says do it. She smiled. Then do it. It wasn't advice exactly. It was permission. And somehow, that made the decision easier. The trouble started in the 3rd week. Colt had been in town picking up supplies when he ran into Darren Voss. Voss was a drifter who'd been hanging around Ashford for the better part of a year, doing odd jobs and drinking away whatever he earned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been broken and badly reset. People gave him space, not out of respect, but out of caution. Colt didn't like him, but he'd never had a reason to do anything about it. That changed when Voss started talking about Eliza. "Heard you got yourself a mail-order bride," Voss said, leaning against the wall outside the saloon. He had a half-empty bottle in one hand and a smirk on his face. "That true?" Colt kept walking. "She as pretty as they say?" Voss called after him. Colt stopped. He didn't turn around. "Mind your business, Voss." "Just making conversation." Voss pushed off the wall and sauntered closer. "Saw her at the school the other day. Teaching the kids. Real noble. Walk away." "Why? You worried I might try something?" Colt turned slowly. He was a few inches shorter than Voss, but he didn't back down. "I'm telling you once, leave her alone." Voss grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Relax, Reeves. I'm just talking." "You're done talking." For a moment, Voss looked like he might push it. Then he shrugged and took a swig from the bottle. "Sure. Whatever you say, boss." He walked off, and Colt forced himself to unclench his fists. He didn't tell Eliza about the encounter. He told himself it was because it didn't matter, that Voss was all talk and no action. But the truth was, he didn't want her to worry. She'd come out here to start over, not to deal with men like Voss. But the next week, Voss showed up at the school. Eliza told him about it that night. "He came by in the afternoon, she said, her voice calm but tight. Said he was looking for work. Asked if I needed help with anything." Colt's jaw tightened. "What did you say?" "I told him no. He left." "Did he say anything else?" She hesitated. "He asked if you treated me well." Colt stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'll talk to him." "Colt, I'll talk to him." She stood too, crossing her arms. "And say what?" "He didn't do anything. He was polite even. If you go after him, you'll make it worse. He's testing boundaries." "Then let me handle it." He stared at her, frustrated. "You don't know men like him." "I know enough." They stood there in the silence, neither willing to back down. Finally, Eliza sighed. "I'm not asking you to ignore it. I'm asking you to trust me. If he crosses the line, I'll tell you, but right now, all he's done is talk." Colt wanted to argue, but she was right, and he knew it. "Fine," he said, "but if he comes back, I'll tell you." He nodded, though the knot in his chest didn't loosen. 2 days later, Voss was back. This time, he didn't bother with pretense. He showed up at the school just as Eliza was dismissing the children for the day, standing in the doorway with that same lazy smirk. "Afternoon, Mrs. Reeves." Eliza didn't look up from the papers she was sorting. "Mr. Voss? Just wanted to check in. Make sure you're settling in all right." "I'm fine, thank you." He stepped inside, uninvited. "This is a nice setup you've got here, real charitable. Teaching these kids. It's not charity, it's education." Right. He picked up a piece of chalk from one of the desks, rolling it between his fingers. "Still, must be lonely out here. You and Reeves, all by yourselves on that ranch." Eliza set down her papers and faced him. "Is there something you need, Mr. Voss?" His smirk widened. Just being neighborly. Then be neighborly somewhere else. For a moment, his expression darkened. Then he dropped the chalk and raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. No offense meant." He left, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. That night, Eliza told Colt everything, and this time he didn't wait for permission. Colt found Voss at the saloon the next evening. The place was crowded, loud with the sound of men drinking and gambling. Voss was at a table in the back playing cards with 2 other drifters. He looked up as Colt approached, and his smirk returned. "Reeves, here to join the game?" Colt ignored the question. "Outside. Now." Voss leaned back in his chair, making a show of considering it. Then he tossed his cards on the table and stood. "Sure. Why not?" They went out into the alley behind the saloon. It was dark, the only light coming from a lamp in the window above. The air smelled like rot and old beer. Colt didn't waste time. "Stay away from my wife." Voss laughed. That what this is about? I was just being friendly. You were pushing. Don't do it again. Or what? Colt stepped closer, his voice low. Or I'll make sure you regret it. Voss's smile faded. He looked Colt up and down as if measuring him. Then he spat on the ground. Big talk for a man who hides behind a woman. Walk away, Voss. Make me. Colt's fist connected with Voss's jaw before the other man could react. Voss staggered back, crashing into a stack of crates. He came up swinging, but Colt ducked under the punch and drove his shoulder into Voss's gut, slamming him against the wall. They grappled, trading blows in the narrow space. Voss was bigger, but Colt was faster, and he'd spent years working a ranch. His body was all muscle and endurance. He landed a punch to Voss's ribs, then another to his face, splitting his lip. Voss roared and shoved him back, pulling a knife from his belt. Colt froze. That's what I thought, Voss said, breathing hard. Blood dripped from his mouth. You don't got the stomach for this. Colt raised his hand slowly. Put the knife down. Why? You started this. And I'm ending it. You come near Eliza again, and I won't stop at my fists. Voss laughed, a wet, ugly sound. You think you scare me? You think... The door to the saloon opened and light spilled into the alley. Ray Whitcomb stepped out, followed by two other men. Problem here? Ray asked, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Voss glanced at them, then back at Colt. He wiped the blood from his mouth and folded the knife. No problem. He pushed past Colt and disappeared into the street. Ray looked at Colt. You all right? Colt nodded, though his knuckles were bleeding. That was stupid, Ray said. I know. You want me to talk to the sheriff? No, it's done. Ray didn't look convinced, but he didn't push it. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. When Colt got home, Eliza was waiting. She took one look at his hands and led him to the kitchen without a word. She poured water into a basin, soaked a cloth, and began cleaning the blood from his knuckles. You talked to him, she said quietly. Yeah. And? It's handled. She didn't respond, just kept working, her touch gentle but efficient. When she finished, she wrapped his hands in clean bandages and stepped back. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did. She looked at him for a long moment, and he couldn't read her expression. Then she nodded. Thank you. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. But later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he realized something had shifted between them. This wasn't just an arrangement anymore. It was something else. Something neither of them had planned for. And in a place like this, that made it dangerous. The fight changed things, though not in the way Colt expected. Word spread fast in a town the size of Ashford. By morning, everyone knew that Colt Reeves had put Darren Voss against a wall in the alley behind Murphy's saloon. The details got embellished with each retelling. Some said Voss pulled a gun. Others claimed Colt broke his nose. A few swore the whole thing was over a card game. Nobody mentioned Eliza's name in public, but everyone knew that's what it was really about. Colt kept his head down and went about his work. He had cattle to move, fences to check, a ranch that didn't care about small-town gossip. But he felt the eyes on him when he rode into town for supplies, heard the conversations that stopped when he walked into a room. Ray brought it up 3 days later while they were branding calves in the south pasture. People are talking, Ray said, pressing the iron against a calf's flank. The smell of burned hair filled the air. Colt held the animal steady. People always talk. This is different. You made Voss look weak. Men like him don't forget that. He should have thought about that before he went near Eliza. Ray released the calf and straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying be careful. Voss has friends, nasty ones. Let them come. That's not smart. Probably not. Ray shook his head but didn't argue further. They worked in silence for a while, moving through the herd with practiced efficiency. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and heavy. When they finished, Colt rode back to the house alone. The land stretched out around him, empty and indifferent. He'd always liked that about it, the way it didn't ask questions or demand explanations. Out here, a man's actions mattered more than his words. But now he wondered if he'd acted too fast, pushed too hard. He thought about Eliza, about the way she'd bandaged his hands without asking why he'd done it. She hadn't scolded him or told him he was reckless. She'd just taken care of him, quiet and steady, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He wasn't used to that. Most of his life, he'd been alone. After his parents died when he was 16, he drifted through mining camps and cattle drives, learning hard lessons and trusting no one. When he finally saved enough to buy land, he'd built this place with his own hands, asking for nothing. Eliza disrupted that, not in a loud way, but in the small moments that accumulated like snow. The way she reorganized the pantry so he could actually find things. The way she left coffee on the stove for him in the mornings. The way she listened when he talked, really listened, instead of just waiting for her turn to speak. It scared him more than Voss ever could. When he got back to the house, she was sitting on the porch with a stack of papers, grading assignments from the school. She looked up as he dismounted. "How'd it go?" "Fine. Lost count at 73. She smiled. "That's more than last spring." "Yeah." He tied the horse to the rail and climbed the steps. "You eat yet?" "Not yet. I was waiting for you." That stopped him. "You don't have to do that." "I know." They went inside together and Eliza set about making dinner while Colt washed up. It had become a routine over the past few weeks. She cooked, he cleaned, they ate together at the table instead of him taking his plate to the porch like he used to. Tonight she made stew with the last of the winter vegetables and bread that was only slightly burned on the bottom. Colt ate without complaint. He'd had worse. "The Hendersons are sending their youngest daughter to the school," Eliza said between bites. "That makes 12 students now." "That's good." "It is, but I'm running out of space. The building's too small." Colt looked up. "How much space you need?" She thought about it. "Double what I have now, maybe more if the number keeps growing." "You could use the old barn on the Miller property. It's been sitting empty since he died." "Would his widow sell?" "Might lease it. I can ask." Eliza nodded slowly. "That could work. I'd need help fixing it up, though. It's probably falling apart." "I'll help." She met his eyes across the table, and something passed between them. Not quite a promise, but close. "Thank you," she said quietly. He shrugged. "Makes sense. Kids need a place to learn." They finished eating in comfortable silence, and afterward Colt helped her wash the dishes. It was strange, standing side by side at the basin, their hands occasionally brushing in the soapy water. He'd never done this with anyone before. When they were done, Eliza dried her hands and turned to him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you really answer my letter?" The question caught him off guard. "I told you I needed help with the ranch." "You could have hired hands. You didn't need a wife for that." He didn't answer right away. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkening land, trying to find the right words. "I was tired," he said finally. "Tired of doing everything alone. Tired of coming home to an empty house." He paused. "And I figured if I was going to spend the rest of my life out here, I might as well have someone to spend it with." "That's honest." "It's the truth." She came to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender soap. "I answered your ad because I was suffocating back east. My family wanted me to marry a banker who talked about himself for 3 hours straight and never once asked what I wanted. They said I was too old to be choosy, that teaching was fine for young girls but not a real life." Colt glanced at her. "So you left?" "I left." She smiled slightly. "I thought the frontier would be different. Harder, maybe, but more honest." "Is it?" "So far." They stood there together, watching the last light fade from the sky. Colt felt something shifting inside him, some wall he'd built years ago beginning to crack. "I'm glad you came," he said. Eliza looked at him, her expression soft. "So am I." The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then Eliza stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should get some sleep. Early day tomorrow." "Yeah, me too." She paused at the doorway to her room. "Good night, Colt." It was the first time she'd used his first name. "Good night, Eliza." She disappeared into her room, and Colt stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. The next morning, Colt rode into town to talk to Mrs. Miller about the barn. She was a frail woman in her 70s, living alone in a house too big for her. She answered the door with suspicious eyes. "Mr. Reeves, this is unexpected." "Morning, Mrs. Miller. I wanted to talk to you about your barn." She frowned. "What about it?" "My wife's running a school in town. She needs more space. I was wondering if you'd be willing to lease the barn." Mrs. Miller studied him for a long moment. "Your wife, that's the woman from back east?" "That's right. I heard she's causing quite a stir. She's teaching kids to read, that's all." Mrs. Miller crossed her arms. "How much you offering?" They negotiated for 20 minutes. Mrs. Miller drove a harder bargain than Colt expected, but they eventually settled on a price that wouldn't break him. She'd lease the barn for 2 years with an option to buy. "One condition," Mrs. Miller said as they shook hands. "I want to meet her, your wife." "I'll bring her by." "Good. I like to know who's using my property." Colt left feeling lighter than he had in days. He stopped by the general store to pick up nails and lumber, then headed back to the ranch. Eliza was already gone when he got there, off to the school, leaving a note on the table that said she'd be back by evening. Colt spent the afternoon working on the barn, taking measurements and making a list of what they'd need. It was solid work, the kind that cleared his head. By the time the sun started dropping, he'd mapped out a plan. The barn could easily hold 30 students, maybe more if they added benches along the walls. He was loading tools into the wagon when he heard hoofbeats. 2 riders approached from the east, moving fast. Colt straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle leaning against the wagon. But it was just Ray and one of the hands, a young kid named Tommy, who'd only been working the ranch for a month. Ray pulled up short, his horse blowing hard. "We got a problem." Colt's chest tightened. "What kind of problem?" "Voss. He's been running his mouth all over town, saying you sucker punched him, saying you're scared to face him fair." "I don't care what he says." "You should. He's calling you out." Colt went still. "Calling me out how?" "He's at Murphy's right now, telling anyone who'll listen that you're a coward. Says if you got any backbone, you'll meet him in the street." Tommy shifted nervously in his saddle. "Half the town's gathering to watch, boss." Colt closed his eyes. This was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid. A public fight would turn this into something bigger than it needed to be, something that wouldn't end with fists. But if he didn't show, Voss would just keep pushing. And out here, a man who backed down from a challenge might as well be invisible. "Stay here," Colt told Ray. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, come looking." "The hell I will. I'm coming with you." "Ray, you think I'm letting you walk into that alone?" "Not a chance." Colt wanted to argue, but he knew Ray well enough to know it wouldn't matter. "Fine. Tommy, you stay here. If Eliza comes back, tell her I'll be home soon." Tommy nodded, looking relieved to be left behind. Colt and Ray rode hard for town. The sun was setting when they arrived, casting long shadows across the main street. A crowd had gathered outside Murphy's saloon, maybe 30 people standing in loose clusters. Colt spotted shopkeepers, ranch hands, even a few women watching from the boardwalk. And there, in the center of it all, stood Darren Voss. He'd cleaned himself up since the fight, but the bruises were still visible on his jaw. He stood with his arms crossed, a smirk on his face, flanked by 2 men Colt didn't recognize. Colt dismounted slowly, handing the reins to Ray. "You sure about this?" Ray asked quietly. "No." Colt walked forward, and the crowd parted to let him through. The air felt electric, charged with the anticipation of violence. Voss grinned when he saw him. "There he is, the big man himself." Colt stopped about 10 feet away. "You got something to say? Say it." "I already said it. You're a coward who hides behind his wife." The crowd murmured. Colt felt every eye on him, waiting to see what he'd do. "I'm not fighting you, Voss." Voss's grin widened. "Told you. Coward. Call me whatever you want. I'm done with this." He turned to leave, and that's when Voss made his mistake. "Guess your wife likes real men, then. I'll have to pay her another visit." "Oswald to..." Colt stopped. The crowd went silent. He turned back slowly, and something in his expression made Voss's smirk falter. What did you just say? Voss recovered quickly, puffing out his chest. You heard me? Colt didn't think. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and drove his fist into Voss's face. Voss went down hard, blood spraying from his nose. The crowd erupted, shouting and pressing forward. Voss scrambled to his feet, rage twisting his features, and came at Colt swinging. They fought in the street, brutal and graceless. Voss landed a punch to Colt's ribs that knocked the wind out of him. Colt responded with an uppercut that snapped Voss's head back. They grappled, fell, rolled in the dirt. Someone was shouting for them to stop, but Colt couldn't hear it over the roaring in his ears. All he could think about was Voss's words, the threat hanging in the air like poison. He got Voss in a headlock and squeezed until the bigger man started gasping. Voss thrashed, trying to break free, but Colt held on. You go near her again, Nust, Colt said through gritted teeth, and I'll kill you. You understand me? Voss clawed at his arm, choking. I said, do you understand? Yes, Voss gasped. Yes! Colt shoved him away. Voss collapsed in the dirt, coughing and spitting blood. The crowd had gone quiet again, watching. Colt stood there, breathing hard, his knuckles bleeding. He looked around at the faces staring back at him, some shocked, some approving, some carefully neutral. Then a voice cut through the silence. That's enough! Sheriff Wade pushed through the crowd, a tall man with gray hair and a badge that looked like it had been pinned to his vest for about 100 years. He looked at Colt, then at Voss, then back at Colt. You two done? Colt nodded. Good. Voss. Get out of my sight before I throw you in a cell for disturbing the peace. Reeves, come with me. Voss staggered to his feet, helped by his 2 friends. He shot Colt a look of pure hatred before disappearing into the saloon. Colt followed the sheriff down the street to his office, Ray trailing behind. Inside, Wade gestured to a chair. Sit. Colt sat. Wade leaned against his desk, arms crossed. You want to tell me what that was about? He threatened my wife. I heard. Half the town heard. Wade sighed. Look, Reeves, I get it. Man talks about your wife. You want to shut him up. But you can't just beat the hell out of people in the middle of the street. He started it. And you finished it. That's the problem. Wade rubbed his face. Voss is trouble. I know that. But he's got connections. People who won't take kindly to you making him look like a fool. What kind of connections? The kind that carry guns and don't ask questions. Wade paused. You need to be smart about this. Watch your back. Watch your wife. And for the love of everything, stop picking fights. Colt stood. I didn't pick this fight. He did. Doesn't matter who started it if you both end up dead. Colt didn't have an answer for that. He left the sheriff's office with Ray, and they rode back to the ranch in silence. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. His ribs ached where Voss had hit him, and his hands felt like they'd been dragged over broken glass. When they reached the ranch, Eliza was standing on the porch. She'd been waiting for him. Colt dismounted, and Ray took the horses to the barn without a word. Eliza came down the steps, her face tight with worry. Tommy told me what happened. I'm fine. You're bleeding. I've had worse. She didn't argue. She just took his arm and led him inside, sitting him down at the table. She fetched the same basin and cloth from before, her movements quick and efficient. You can't keep doing this, she said as she cleaned the blood from his knuckles. He threatened you, and you nearly got yourself killed. I handled it. She looked up at him, her eyes blazing. This isn't handling it, Colt. This is making it worse. Every time you fight him, he has more reason to come after us. What was I supposed to do? Let him talk about you like that? Yes, she said. I don't care what he says. Words don't hurt me. They hurt me. The admission hung in the air between them. Eliza's expression softened and she set down the cloth. I know, she said quietly, but this has to stop before someone gets hurt. It's already stopped. Voss won't bother us again. You don't know that. She was right, and he knew it. But he didn't say so. He just sat there, letting her bandage his hands, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. When she finished, she didn't step away. She stayed close, her hand resting on his. I need you to promise me something, she said. What? Promise me you'll be careful, that you won't do anything stupid." He looked at her, at the worry etched into her face, and felt something crack open inside him. "I promise." She nodded, and for a moment he thought she might say something else, but she just squeezed his hand and stepped back. "Get some rest. You look like hell." He almost smiled. "Thanks." That night, Colt lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying the fight in his mind. He'd meant what he said. He'd handled it. Voss wouldn't come near Eliza again, not after being humiliated twice in front of the whole town. But the sheriff's warning echoed in his head. Connections. People who carry guns and don't ask questions. He'd made an enemy today. Maybe more than one. And out here, enemies didn't forget. The days that followed were quiet, almost unnervingly so. Colt threw himself into work, moving cattle to new pasture and starting repairs on the Miller barn. Eliza continued teaching, her class growing to 15 students by the end of the week. They fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and fragile, like something that could shatter if either of them pushed too hard. But underneath it all, Colt could feel the tension building. He saw it in the way people looked at him in town, in the conversations that stopped when he walked into a room. Voss had disappeared. No one had seen him in days, but his absence felt more threatening than his presence. Ray brought news on a Tuesday afternoon. "Voss left town," he said, leaning against the fence while Colt hammered in a post. "Rode out 3 days ago. Nobody knows where he went." Colt paused mid-swing. "Good riddance." "Maybe. Or maybe he's coming back with those friends Wade mentioned." "You're worrying too much, and you're not worrying enough." Colt drove the post into the ground with more force than necessary. "What do you want me to do, Ray? Sit around waiting for something that might not happen?" "I want you to be prepared. Get more guns, hire extra hands. Hell, talk to Wade about getting some protection." "Wade can't do anything until something actually happens." "That's my point. By the time something happens, it'll be too late." Colt set down the hammer and faced him. "I'm not living my life scared of Darren Voss." Then live it smart." They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Ray shook his head. "Fine. But when this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you." He walked off, leaving Colt alone with the fence and his thoughts. That evening, Colt told Eliza about the conversation. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. "Do you think he's right?" she asked when he finished. "I don't know, maybe." "Then we should prepare." "How?" She thought for a moment. "Hire more hands, someone who can stay at the house when we're both gone. And maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe I should stop going into town for a while." "No. Colt, you're not giving up the school because of Voss. That's exactly what he wants. I'm not giving it up. I'm just being cautious." "It's the same thing." She sighed, frustration flashing across her face. "You can't protect me from everything." "I can try." "And what if trying gets you killed?" The question hit harder than any punch Voss had thrown. Colt opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Eliza stood and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. "I didn't come all this way to watch you throw your life away over me." "That's not what I'm doing, isn't it?" She turned to face him. "Every time you fight him, you're risking everything. The ranch, your future, us. There is no us if I let him walk all over us. There's no us if you're dead." The words hung between them, stark and undeniable. Colt crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "I'm not going to die. You don't know that. I know I'm not going to stand by and do nothing." She looked up at him, and he saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of Voss, but fear for him. "Then be smart about it," she said softly. "Please." He wanted to promise her that. Wanted to tell her he'd be careful, that he'd think before he acted. But they both knew he had already made his choice. The night before everything fell apart, they had dinner together like always. Eliza had made chicken and potatoes, and they ate in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Afterward, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I've been thinking," Eliza said, breaking the silence. "About what?" "About getting married. Properly, I mean. Not just the legal arrangement." Colt looked at her, surprised. You want that? I think I do. She smiled slightly. I know it's supposed to be the other way around. You're supposed to ask me. I don't do things the usual way. I've noticed. They sat there, shoulders almost touching, and Colt felt something settle inside him, something that felt almost like peace. All right, he said. Let's do it. Really? Yeah, if you want to. She reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were warm against his, and he realized this was the first time they'd held hands. I want to, she said. They sat there until the moon rose, talking about small things, what kind of ceremony they'd have, who they'd invite, whether they should do it in town or out here on the ranch. It felt real in a way nothing else had, like they were building something together, something that might actually last. Colt went to bed that night feeling lighter than he had in years. He didn't know it was the last peaceful night they'd have. The next morning started like any other. Colt was up before dawn, checking on the horses. Eliza was in the kitchen making coffee. Ray and the hands were already out riding the north fence line. Everything was normal. And then Voss came back. He came back with 4 men. Colt was in the barn when Ray burst through the door, his face pale and his breath coming hard. They're here. Colt looked up from the saddle he was mending. Who's here? Voss. And he brought company. Colt dropped the saddle and moved to the door. Through the gap in the wood, he could see them riding up the main road, 5 riders moving slow and deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. Voss was in front, sitting tall in his saddle. The men with him looked rough, the kind who'd done hard time or should have. They were armed, pistols visible on their hips, rifles in their saddle holsters. Where's Eliza? Colt asked, his voice tight. Inside, I told Tommy to stay with her. Good. Get the other hands. Everyone armed. Understand? Ray nodded and took off running. Colt went back into the barn and grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. He checked the chamber, fully loaded, and took a breath to steady himself. Then he walked out to meet them. The riders had stopped about 50 yards from the house, fanned out in a loose line. Voss sat in the middle, that same smirk on his face, though the bruises from their last fight were still visible. Colt stopped at the edge of the porch, rifle held across his chest, not pointing at anyone, but ready. You're on my land, he called out. Voss leaned forward in his saddle. That's a fact, and I'm here to settle our business. We don't have business. See? That's where you're wrong. Voss gestured to the men around him. You embarrassed me, Reeves, twice. Made me look weak in front of the whole town. I can't let that stand. Then you shouldn't have run your mouth. One of the men next to Voss, a heavy-set guy with a scar running down his cheek, laughed. Got some stones on him, don't he? Voss didn't smile. Get off the property, Reeves. Take your men and leave. This place is mine now. Colt felt ice settle in his gut. You're out of your mind. Am I? You assaulted me. Multiple times. I got witnesses. Far as the law is concerned, you're the criminal here. And criminals don't get to keep their land. Wade won't back that play. Wade's 100 miles away at a trial. Won't be back for a week. By then, this'll all be settled. Colt's grip tightened on the rifle. Behind him, he heard the door open. He didn't need to look to know it was Eliza. Colt? Her voice was steady, but he could hear the fear underneath. Stay inside. I'm not. Stay. Inside. She didn't move, and he didn't have time to argue. Voss was watching the exchange with amusement. That your wife? Voss called out. Pretty thing. Be a shame if something happened to her. Colt raised the rifle, pointing it directly at Voss. Say that again. The 4 men with Voss tensed, hands moving to their weapons. But Voss just smiled. Easy now. I'm just making conversation. You're making threats. And if you don't get off my land in the next 10 seconds, I'm putting a bullet in you. You won't. Try me. For a moment, nobody moved. The air felt thick, charged with the promise of violence. Colt's finger rested on the trigger, and he meant what he said. He'd pull it. He'd drop Voss right here and deal with the consequences later. Then Ray appeared from around the side of the barn, rifle in hand. Behind him came the other 2 hands, both armed. Voss glanced at them, then back at Colt. His smirk faded slightly. "This ain't over, Reeves." "Yeah, it is. You're leaving. Now." Voss stared at him for a long moment, and Colt could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. 5 against 4. Not great odds, especially when Colt had the high ground and the home advantage. Finally, Voss jerked his reins and turned his horse. "Let's go." The 5 of them rode off, slow and unhurried, like they were just out for a casual ride. But Colt didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. Then his legs almost gave out. Eliza was at his side in an instant, her hand on his arm. "Are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine. You're shaking." He was. He hadn't noticed. Ray came up the porch steps, his face grim. "They'll be back. I know. And next time they won't just talk." Colt looked at him. "What do you suggest?" "Get Eliza out of here. Send her somewhere safe until this blows over." "No," Eliza said before Colt could respond. "I'm not leaving." "Ma'am, with respect, I said no." She turned to Colt. "This is my home too. I'm not running." Colt wanted to argue, wanted to put her on a horse and send her back east where she'd be safe from all of this. But he knew that look on her face. She'd made up her mind. "All right, Eason," he said. "But we do this smart. Ray, I want someone watching the property at all times. 2-man shifts, armed. Nobody goes anywhere alone." Ray nodded. "What about you?" "I'm going to town. I need to send a telegram to Wade. Let him know what's happening." "You sure that's a good idea? Voss could be waiting. He won't try anything in broad daylight. Not in town." Ray didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. Colt went inside to grab his coat and his pistol. Eliza followed him. "I'm coming with you," she said. "No. Colt, I need you here. Safe. Please." She looked like she wanted to fight him on it, but something in his voice stopped her. She nodded reluctantly. "Be careful." "I will." He kissed her forehead, a quick, impulsive gesture that surprised both of them, and then he was out the door before either could say anything about it. The ride to town took 40 minutes, and Colt spent every second of it looking over his shoulder. The land felt different now, hostile in a way it never had before. Every shadow could be hiding someone. Every sound could be hoofbeats. But he made it to Ashford without incident. The town was quiet, midday sun beating down on empty streets. Most people were inside, avoiding the heat. Colt tied his horse outside the telegraph office and went in. The operator was a skinny kid named Frank, who looked up from his desk with wide eyes. "Mr. Reeves, didn't expect to see you." "I need to send a message to Sheriff Wade. It's urgent." Frank fumbled for a pencil. Sure, what's the message?" Colt dictated it quickly. Voss returned with armed men, made threats, "Need assistance immediately," and Frank tapped it out on the telegraph key with nervous fingers. "Should get to him within the hour," Frank said, "assuming he's near a station." "Thanks." Colt paid and turned to leave, but Frank stopped him. "Mr. Reeves? People are saying Voss is gunning for you. That true?" "Yeah. That's bad. Real bad. I know. My pa says men like Voss don't stop until someone's dead." Colt met his eyes. "Your pa's probably right." He left before Frank could say anything else. Outside, the street was still empty. Colt untied his horse and was about to mount when he heard a voice behind him. "Reeves!" He turned. Mayor Porter was standing on the boardwalk, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Mayor, heard you had some trouble out at your place. Word travels fast." "It does." Porter shifted his weight. "Look, I don't want to get involved in your personal business, but this is affecting the whole town. People are scared." "Of what?" "Of a range war, of bodies in the streets, of their kids getting caught in the crossfire." Colt felt anger flare in his chest. "I didn't start this." "Maybe not, but you sure as hell didn't walk away from it either." "He threatened my wife, and you beat him half to death, twice." Porter sighed. "I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying you need to find a way to end this that doesn't involve gunfire. You got any suggestions?" "Leave. Take your wife and go somewhere else. Start over." Colt stared at him. "You're telling me to abandon my ranch. I'm telling you to stay alive. That land is everything I've built. I'm not giving it up because of Darren Voss." "Then you're a fool." Porter walked away, leaving Colt standing there with his fists clenched. He wanted to go after him, to make him understand. But what was the point? Porter didn't care about right or wrong. He cared about keeping the peace, even if it meant sacrificing the innocent. Colt mounted his horse and rode out of town, his jaw tight with frustration. The ride back should have cleared his head. Instead, it just gave him time to think about everything that could go wrong. Voss wouldn't give up. That much was clear. He'd keep pushing until one of them was dead or broken. And the law wouldn't help. Wade was too far away. And even if he came back, what could he do? Arrest Voss for talking? For riding on someone else's property? No. This was going to end one way, with blood. Colt was still half a mile from the ranch when he saw the smoke. His heart stopped. He kicked his horse into a gallop, closing the distance as fast as the animal could run. The smoke was thick, black, rising from somewhere near the house. Not the house. Please, not the house. He crested the rise and saw it. The barn was on fire. Flames engulfed the structure, reaching up toward the sky in angry orange waves. The heat was intense even from a distance, and Colt could hear the roar of the fire, the crackle of wood collapsing in on itself. He rode straight to the house and dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. Ray was on the porch, soot-streaked and coughing. "Where's Eliza?" Ray pointed toward the school building, the one they'd been fixing up. "She's safe. She was inside when it started." "What happened?" "Don't know. 1 minute everything was fine, the next the barn was up in flames." Ray wiped his face. "We got the horses out, but the rest—" Colt looked at the barn, at the years of work and supplies going up in smoke. They'd stored tools in there, feed, equipment. All of it was gone now. Was it Voss? Had to be. Tommy saw riders heading east right before it started. Couldn't make out faces, but it was 5 of them. Colt's vision went red. He turned and started toward his horse, but Ray grabbed his arm. "Don't! Let go. If you go after them now, you'll get yourself killed. They're expecting it." "I don't care." "Well, I do, and so does she." Ray jerked his head toward where Eliza was emerging from the school building, her face pale. She ran to Colt and he caught her in his arms without thinking. "You're okay," he said, more to himself than to her. I'm fine." She pulled back to look at him. "But the barn—" "I know." They stood there, holding each other, while the fire raged behind them. By the time the flames died down, there was nothing left but charred wood and ash. The structure had collapsed completely, and everything inside was destroyed. Colt walked through the rubble as the sun set, trying to salvage anything he could. But it was pointless. It was all gone. Ray came up beside him. "How much did we lose?" "Everything. 6 months of feed, tools, saddles, probably $3,000 worth, maybe more." Ray swore quietly. "Insurance? Doesn't cover arson." "How do you know it was arson?" Colt kicked at a piece of charred wood. "Because barns don't just catch fire in the middle of the day for no reason." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish this." "How?" "However I have to." That night, Colt sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Eliza was asleep, or pretending to be, in the other room. The house was dark except for a single lamp, and the smell of smoke lingered in everything. He'd failed. Failed to protect his property, failed to see this coming, failed to stop it, and the worst part was knowing it wasn't over. Voss had sent a message with that fire. "This is what happens when you stand against me. This is just the beginning." Colt knew what he had to do. He stood and went to the bedroom, pulling a small wooden box from under the bed. Inside was his father's revolver, the one he'd carried during the range wars 20 years ago. Colt had sworn he'd never use it, but some oaths weren't meant to be kept. He loaded the gun and tucked it into his belt. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Eliza stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes on the gun. "Don't," she said. "I have to." "No, you don't. We can rebuild. We can—" "He'll just burn it down again. And next time, maybe you'll be in there." "So what's your plan? Kill him? Spend the rest of your life running from the law? If that's what it takes?" She crossed the room and stood in front of him. "You promised me you'd be smart. You promised. I also promised to protect you. Can't do both." Yes, you can. We go to the law. We wait for Wade to get back. Wade can't help us. The law can't help us. Colt's voice broke. I've tried doing this the right way, Eliza, and all it's gotten us is a burned barn and a target on our backs. Then we leave. Like Porter said, we start over somewhere else. And let Voss win? I don't care about winning. I care about you staying alive. He wanted to tell her he'd be careful, that he knew what he was doing, but they both knew it would be a lie. Instead, he pulled her close and held her, breathing in the scent of lavender and smoke. I love you, he said quietly. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Eliza went still in his arms. Then she pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. Don't you dare say that like it's goodbye. I'm not. Yes, you are. She grabbed his face with both hands. You listen to me, Colt Reeves. I didn't come all this way, didn't build a life with you, just to watch you throw it away. You want to fight Voss? Fine. But you do it smart. You do it with help. You don't ride off alone like some fool with a death wish. He opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off. I love you too. And I'm not losing you. Not to him. Not to anyone. They stood there, foreheads pressed together, and Colt felt something break inside him. All the walls he'd built, all the distance he'd kept, it crumbled in the face of her fierce, stubborn love. All right, he said. All right. We do it smart. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and he kissed her back with everything he had. They spent the night planning. Ray joined them at the table, along with the other hands. They spread out a map of the area and marked every place Voss and his men might be hiding. Abandoned mines, old homesteads, caves in the hills. We need to find them before they find us, Colt said, and we need proof they burned the barn. Something Wade can use to lock them up. How do we get proof? Tommy asked. One of them will talk. They always do. We just have to apply the right pressure. They worked until dawn, hammering out a plan that had more holes than Colt liked, but was better than going in blind. When the sun came up, they were ready. Colt pulled Ray aside before they left. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, you get Eliza out of here. You take her somewhere safe, you understand? Ray nodded. I understand. Colt went back inside one last time. Eliza was waiting by the door. Be careful, she said. I will. And come back. I will. He kissed her, trying to memorize the feel of her lips, the warmth of her skin. Then he forced himself to pull away. Outside, Ray and the hands were already mounted. Colt swung up onto his horse and took one last look at the house, at Eliza standing on the porch. Then they rode out. They found the first man 2 hours later, holed up in a line shack 15 miles east of the ranch. He was one of Voss's crew, a scrawny guy with a nervous twitch and a guilty conscience written all over his face. Colt kicked in the door and dragged him outside before he could reach for his gun. Where's Voss? The guy sputtered, trying to pull free. I don't know what you're... Colt slammed him against the wall. I asked you a question. I don't know, I swear. He just told us to lay low for a few days. You burned my barn? The guy's eyes went wide. It wasn't my idea, Voss said. That was all Colt needed to hear. He dragged the guy to his horse and tied him up, ignoring his protests. Ray watched without comment. One down, Colt said. 4 to go. They found the second man that afternoon, drunk in a saloon in a town 20 miles south. He didn't put up a fight. The third man tried to run. They caught him anyway. By nightfall, they had 3 of Voss's crew tied up and singing like birds. They all told the same story. Voss had ordered the fire. He'd wanted to send a message, wanted to scare Colt into leaving. It was enough. More than enough. But Voss himself was still missing. They searched for 2 more days, riding themselves and their horses ragged. They checked every hideout, every old mine, every abandoned building within 50 miles. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished, and then, on the 3rd day, they got word. A rider came to the ranch just after dawn, a kid from town with a message scrawled on dirty paper. Colt read it twice, the words not making sense the first time. Then they did, and his blood turned to ice. What is it? Ray asked. Colt looked up, his face pale. It's Eliza. He's got Eliza. The note was short and to the point. Old silver mine, North Ridge. Come alone or she dies. Colt crumpled the paper in his fist, his mind racing. How had Voss gotten to her? She was supposed to be safe, surrounded by men with guns. When did this happen? He demanded. The kid shook his head. Don't know. Guy just paid me to deliver it. Said it was urgent. Colt was already moving, heading for his horse. Ray caught up with him. You can't go alone. It's a trap. I know. Then let us come with you. He'll kill her if I don't come alone. He'll kill you both either way. Colt stopped, his hand on the saddle. Ray was right. He knew Ray was right. But the thought of Eliza in Voss's hands, scared and alone, made rational thinking impossible. I have to try, Ma, he said. Ray grabbed his arm. Then we follow at a distance, give you a head start, but stay close enough to help if things go wrong. Colt wanted to argue, but he couldn't afford to let pride get in the way. Not now. All right, but stay back until I signal. What's the signal? Gunfire. Ray almost smiled. Fair enough. Colt rode hard for the North Ridge, the note burning in his pocket. The old silver mine had been abandoned for years, too dangerous to work after a collapse killed 3 men. It was the perfect place for an ambush. He didn't care. The sun was setting by the time he reached the mine entrance, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Colt dismounted and pulled his rifle from the saddle, checking the chamber one more time. Then he walked inside. The mine was dark, the air stale and thick with dust. Colt moved slowly, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. Somewhere ahead, he could hear voices. He rounded a corner and stopped. There, in the flickering light of a lantern, sat Eliza. She was tied to a support beam, her hands bound behind her back. Her dress was torn, and there was a bruise forming on her cheek, but her eyes were clear and defiant. Voss stood behind her, a gun pressed to her head. Right on time, Voss said. Colt raised his rifle, aiming at Voss's chest. Let her go. Drop the gun first. Not a chance. Voss smiled. Then I guess we're at an impasse. Colt's finger tightened on the trigger. He could take the shot. One clean pull and Voss would be dead. But if he missed, or if Voss got a shot off first. What do you want? Colt asked, stalling for time. I want you to know what it feels like, to lose everything. Voss's voice was cold, empty. You humiliated me, took my pride. Now I'm taking yours. This isn't about pride. This is about you being a coward. Voss's face darkened. Watch your mouth. Eliza spoke then, her voice steady despite the gun at her head. Don't give him what he wants, Colt. Shut up, Voss snapped, pressing the gun harder against her temple. Colt's heart hammered in his chest. He had to make a choice. Lower the gun and hope for an opening, or take the shot and pray he didn't miss. And then Eliza made the choice for him. She threw her weight backward, slamming her head into Voss's stomach. He stumbled, the gun jerking away from her head for just a second. It was enough. Colt fired. The shot echoed through the mine, deafening in the confined space. Voss spun, blood blooming across his shoulder. He tried to bring his gun around, but Colt was already moving. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and hit Voss with the rifle butt, knocking him to the ground. The gun skittered away across the dirt floor. Voss tried to get up, clutching his wounded shoulder. Colt stood over him, rifle aimed at his head. It's over. Voss laughed, a wet, pained sound. You think killing me changes anything? My friends will come. They'll finish what I started. Then I'll deal with them too. Behind them, Colt heard boots on stone. Ray and the others appeared in the entrance, guns drawn. We heard the shot, Ray said. Then he saw Eliza and rushed to cut her free. Colt kept his eyes on Voss. Take him outside, tie him up. 2 of the hands dragged Voss to his feet and hauled him out of the mine. He didn't resist, too weak from blood loss to fight. Eliza was shaking when Ray cut her loose. Colt dropped the rifle and went to her, pulling her into his arms. You're all right. You're all right. I knew you'd come, she whispered against his chest. Always. They held each other while the lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And for the first time in days, Colt allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd survived. But survival came with a cost. They rode back to the ranch in near darkness, Voss tied across the back of Tommy's horse like a sack of grain, bleeding and half-conscious. Eliza rode with Colt, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, her face pressed against his back. She hadn't said much since they left the mine, just held on like she was afraid to let go. Colt didn't push her to talk. He could feel her trembling, could sense the weight of what had happened settling over her. She'd been strong in that mine, stronger than he had any right to expect, but strength had its limits. When they reached the ranch, Ray helped get Voss into the bunkhouse and tied him to a chair. The wound in his shoulder had stopped bleeding, but he looked pale and sweaty. "Should we get a doctor?" Tommy asked. Colt shook his head. "Not yet. I want answers first." He left Voss under Ray's watch and went to find Eliza. She was in the house, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to purple. Colt pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "You hurt anywhere else?" "No, just the face." "How'd he get to you?" She looked up and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Shame. "I was stupid. I went to check on the school after you left, thought I'd be safe in broad daylight." He was waiting inside. Her voice cracked. "He grabbed me before I could scream. Had a cloth over my mouth, something that made everything go fuzzy. Next thing I knew, I was in that mine." Colt reached across the table and took her hand. "It's not your fault." "I should have been more careful." "He would have found a way no matter what you did. Men like Voss always do." She nodded, but he could tell she didn't believe him. They sat there in silence for a while, holding hands across scarred wood. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. "What happens now?" Eliza asked finally. "We wait for Wade. He should be back in a few days. We hand Voss over, let the law deal with him. And if the law doesn't deal with him, if they let him go?" Colt didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, he didn't trust the law to finish this. Not really. Wade was a good man, but he was just one sheriff in a territory that was too big and too wild to tame. Men like Voss slipped through the cracks all the time, walked away from charges that should have put them in prison, found ways to make witnesses disappear. But he couldn't tell Eliza that, not now when she was barely holding herself together. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it," he said instead. She squeezed his hand. "I'm tired, Colt. I'm so tired." "I know. Go to bed. I'll stay up, make sure nothing else happens tonight." "Will you come with me? Just until I fall asleep?" He nodded and helped her to her feet. She leaned against him as they walked to the bedroom, and he realized how much weight she'd lost, how fragile she felt in his arms. He sat on the edge of the bed while she changed behind a screen, then climbed under the blankets. Colt stayed there, one hand resting on her shoulder, until her breathing evened out and he knew she was asleep. Then he went back to the bunkhouse. Ray was still there, sitting across from Voss with a rifle across his knees. Voss had his head tilted back, eyes closed, breathing shallow. "He say anything?" Colt asked. "Not a word." Colt pulled up a chair and sat down facing Voss. For a long moment, he just looked at the man who'd tried to destroy everything he'd built. Then he spoke. "You're going to tell me who else was involved." Voss opened his eyes. "Go to hell." "Already been there. You're looking at it." Colt leaned forward. "See, here's what's going to happen. Sheriff Wade gets back in a few days, and I'm handing you over. You'll stand trial for kidnapping, arson, assault. That's 20 years minimum, probably more. I got lawyers, good ones." "Maybe. But you also got 3 of your crew already singing. They're blaming you for everything, the fire, the threats, all of it. You're going down, Voss. The only question is whether you go down alone or take your friends with you." Voss smiled, showing bloody teeth. "You think I'm scared of prison? I've done time before, I can do it again. Then why'd you come after me? Why burn my barn? Why take my wife?" The smile faded. "Because you disrespected me. I defended my wife. That's not disrespect, that's being a man. You made me look weak. You were already weak. I just showed everyone what you really are." Voss lunged forward, straining against the ropes. "You don't know anything about me." Colt didn't flinch. "I know you're a coward who hides behind a gun and men dumber than you. I know you hurt people because it's the only way you feel strong. And I know that deep down, you're scared. Of what? Of being nobody. Of dying and leaving nothing behind but bad memories and unpaid debts." Voss stared at him, breathing hard. Then he slumped back in the chair. You don't get it, he said quietly. Men like you got land, you got a future. Me, I got nothing, never did. So yeah, maybe I'm a coward. Maybe I am scared, but at least I tried to take something for myself instead of just accepting scraps. Colt felt something twist in his chest. Not pity exactly, but recognition. He'd been where Voss was once, angry at the world and looking for someone to blame. You could have worked for what you wanted, Colt said. Built something instead of tearing things down. Easy for you to say. No, it's not. You think this ranch just fell into my lap? I worked 15 years for this, broke my back, nearly died twice, lost everything I had more than once. But I kept going because I believed it would be worth it. And was it? Colt thought about Eliza asleep in the next room, about the school she'd built, about the life they were carving out of this hard land. Yeah, it was. Voss looked away. Well, good for you. They sat in silence after that. Colt stood eventually, nodded to Ray, and went outside. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Colt walked to the edge of the property and stood there, letting the wind cut through him. He'd won. Voss was caught, Eliza was safe, and in a few days, this would all be over. So why did he feel like something was still wrong? The answer came 2 days later. Sheriff Wade arrived at the ranch just after noon, looking tired and dusty from the long ride. He had 2 deputies with him, both young and nervous. Heard you had some excitement, Wade said, dismounting. Colt shook his hand. That's one word for it? They walked to the bunkhouse together, and Wade looked at Voss with the weary expression of a man who'd seen too many men like him. Darren Voss, should have known you'd be mixed up in this. Voss didn't respond. Wade turned to Colt. You got proof he burned your barn? 3 witnesses, his own men. They'll testify. And the kidnapping? My wife. She'll testify too. Wade nodded slowly. All right. We'll take him in, hold him for trial. He gestured to the deputies, who moved forward to cut Voss loose from the chair and put him in handcuffs. Voss stood, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. He looked at Colt one last time. This isn't over. Yeah, it is. Wade led Voss outside and Colt followed. They loaded him onto a horse, hands cuffed behind his back, and Wade swung up onto his own mount. I'll need your wife to come to town tomorrow to make a statement, Wade said. She'll be there. And you might want to think about getting some extra hands for a while. Voss has friends, and they might not take kindly to him being locked up. I can handle it. Wade gave him a long look. I'm sure you can. But be smart about it, Reeves. Don't do anything that'll land you on the wrong side of the law. Colt nodded, and Wade rode off with his deputies and their prisoner. Ray came to stand beside Colt, watching them disappear down the road. You think it's really over? Ray asked. I hope so. But you don't believe it. No, I don't. That night, Colt and Eliza sat on the porch together, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The stars were out again, bright and indifferent. Wade wants you to come to town tomorrow, Colt said. Make a statement. Eliza nodded. All right. You don't have to. We got enough evidence without your testimony. I want to. He needs to pay for what he did. Colt looked at her. She'd been quiet since the mine, going through the motions but not really present. He could see it in the way she moved, the way she avoided looking at him for too long. Talk to me, he said. About what? About what's going on in your head. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I keep thinking about that mine, about how close it came. But it didn't. You're here. You're safe. This time. But what about next time? There won't be a next time. You don't know that. She turned to face him, and he saw fear in her eyes. This place is trying to kill us, Colt. First the barn, then the kidnapping. How much more can we take before it breaks us? We're not breaking, aren't we? Look at us. You're walking around with a gun on your hip like we're at war. I can't sleep without having nightmares. We're living like prisoners in our own home. Colt didn't know what to say to that. She was right. They were living on edge, waiting for the next attack. What do you want me to do? He asked. I don't know. Maybe Porter was right. Maybe we should leave. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. You want to give up? I want to survive. There's a difference. This ranch is everything I've built, and I'm asking you to build something else, somewhere safer, somewhere we can actually have a life instead of just fighting to stay alive. Colt stood up, anger flaring. So that's it? We just walk away? Let Voss and men like him win? Voss is in jail, for now, but there'll be others. There's always others. He paced the length of the porch. I've spent my whole life running from one place to another, never putting down roots because it was easier to move than to fight. I swore when I bought this land that I was done running. Then stop running and start thinking, is this land worth dying for? Yes. Eliza stood too, her voice rising. Well, it's not worth it to me. I came here to start a life with you, not to bury you. They stared at each other, both breathing hard. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither wanted to say. Finally, Eliza's shoulders sagged. I can't do this anymore, Colt. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when I'm terrified every time you leave the house. So what are you saying? I'm saying I need you to choose, the land or me. Colt felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. That's not fair. None of this is fair. She went inside, leaving him alone on the porch. Colt stood there for a long time, staring out at the dark land. He thought about everything he'd built here, all the years of work and sacrifice. He thought about his father, who died trying to hold on to land that wasn't worth the blood it cost. And he thought about Eliza, about the way she'd looked at him in that mine, trusting him to save her. The choice should have been easy, but it wasn't. The next morning, they rode to town in silence. Eliza sat stiff and distant beside him in the wagon, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Sheriff Wade's office was small and cramped, smelling of old coffee and tobacco. Wade took Eliza's statement himself, writing down every detail with patient care. He say anything to you? Wade asked. Before Colt showed up? Eliza nodded. He said Colt had taken something from him. His pride, his reputation. He said he was going to take everything from Colt in return. Did he threaten to kill you? Not in so many words, but the implication was clear. Wade finished writing and set down his pen. Thank you, Mrs. Reeves. This should be enough to put him away for a long time. How long? 10 years? Maybe 15 if the judge is feeling harsh. Kidnapping's a serious charge, especially of a woman. Eliza nodded, but Colt could see the doubt in her eyes. 10 years wasn't forever. Men got out early for good behavior, or they escaped, or they sent friends to settle scores. They left the office and walked back to the wagon. Ashford was busy today, people moving in and out of shops, going about their lives like nothing had happened. Mrs. Reeves? They turned. Mrs. Miller was coming toward them, moving faster than Colt had ever seen her move. I heard what happened, Mrs. Miller said, slightly out of breath. Are you all right? I'm fine, thank you. Thank heavens. Mrs. Miller looked at Colt. And you caught the man who did it? We did. Good. That animal deserves worse than prison. She turned back to Eliza. I also wanted to tell you, the barn is yours. No charge. After everything you've been through, it's the least I can do. Eliza blinked. Mrs. Miller, I can't accept that. You can and you will. That building's been sitting empty for years. Might as well be put to good use. She patted Eliza's hand. Your school is important. The children need it. Don't let what happened make you give up on that. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Mrs. Miller nodded briskly and walked away, leaving them standing there. That was kind of her, Colt said quietly. It was. They climbed into the wagon and started the ride home. About halfway there, Eliza finally spoke. I'm sorry about last night, what I said about choosing. Colt kept his eyes on the road. You meant it. I did. But that doesn't make it fair. She paused. I know this land means everything to you. I shouldn't have asked you to give it up. And I shouldn't have made you feel like you come second to it. She looked at him. So what do we do? Colt took a breath. We finish what we started. We rebuild the barn, we expand the ranch like we planned. We make this place so strong that men like Voss can't touch it. He met her eyes. But if it gets to be too much, if you really can't take it anymore, then we leave. Together. You'd do that? You'd walk away from all this? For you? Yeah, I would. Eliza reached over and took his hand. They rode the rest of the way like that, fingers intertwined, saying nothing because nothing else needed to be said. But peace never lasted long in that territory. 3 weeks later, news came that shattered what little calm they'd found. Colt was in town picking up lumber when Frank from the telegraph office came running out. "Mr. Reeves, Mr. Reeves!" Colt turned. "What is it?" Frank thrust a piece of paper at him. "Just came through. Thought you should know right away." Colt read the message once, then again. Darren Voss killed in custody, stop attack deputy, during transport stop. Shot dead stop, trial canceled stop. The paper crumpled in Colt's fist. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday. About 50 miles east of here." Colt felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Who shot him?" "Don't know. Message doesn't say." Colt walked away, his mind racing. Voss was dead. The threat was over. They were safe. So why did it feel wrong? He went to Wade's office and found the sheriff reading the same telegram. "You heard," Wade said. "Yeah." Colt sat down across from him. "What really happened?" Wade set down the paper and rubbed his face. "Deputy claims Voss tried to escape, grabbed for his gun during a stop. Deputy shot him in self-defense. You believe that?" "Does it matter?" "It does to me." Wade met his eyes. "Off the record?" "No, I don't believe it. Voss was cuffed and wounded. No way he could have grabbed a gun quick enough to pose a real threat." "So what then? The deputy just executed him?" "Maybe. Or maybe someone paid him to. Voss had enemies. Could have been anyone." Colt thought about that. Thought about the 3 men they'd captured who were now sitting in cells waiting for their own trials. Thought about whoever else Voss had crossed over the years. "This going to be investigated?" he asked. "It should be. Probably won't be." Wade leaned back in his chair. "Look, Reeves, I know this isn't the ending you wanted, but Voss is dead. That part of your life is over. My advice? Take it as a blessing and move on." Colt left the office feeling more unsettled than when he'd arrived. When he got back to the ranch, Eliza was waiting on the porch. One look at his face, and she knew something was wrong. "What happened?" He told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "So he's really dead," she said finally. "Yeah. And we're safe." "Yeah." But neither of them sounded convinced. That night, Colt couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what he felt. Voss had terrorized them, burned their property, kidnapped Eliza. By all rights, Colt should be relieved he was dead. Should be celebrating. But all he felt was hollow. Because Voss's death didn't fix anything. It didn't rebuild the barn or erase the fear in Eliza's eyes. It didn't change the fact that this land was hard and unforgiving, that violence was always just one bad decision away. Eliza stirred beside him. "You awake?" "Yeah." "Can't stop thinking about it either." He rolled over to face her. In the moonlight filtering through the window, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "I wanted him to stand trial," she said. "I wanted him to face what he did, to hear a judge tell him he was wrong. I wanted justice, not whatever this was." "I know. Now we'll never get that. We'll never know if the system would have worked." Colt reached for her hand. "Maybe that's for the best." "How?" "Because now we can stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. We can start actually living instead of just surviving." Eliza looked at him, and he saw hope flicker in her eyes. "You really think we can do that?" "I think we have to try." She moved closer, resting her head on his chest. "I'm scared, Colt. So am I. But you never show it." "Doesn't mean I don't feel it." They held each other in the darkness, 2 people trying to find solid ground in a world that kept shifting beneath them. The weeks that followed were strange. Life went on. Colt worked the ranch. Eliza ran the school. The seasons changed, but there was a weight hanging over everything. The trial for Voss's 3 crew members came and went. 2 got 10 years, 1 got 15. None of them caused trouble. The barn was rebuilt, bigger than before, with help from men in town who'd decided Colt and Eliza were worth supporting. The school moved into Mrs. Miller's building, and enrollment climbed to 22 students. On the surface, everything was better than it had been, but Colt couldn't shake the feeling that they were still waiting for something, some final piece that would make everything make sense. It came on a cold morning in October. Colt was checking fence lines when he found it, a cairn of stones on the edge of his property, marking a grave that hadn't been there before. No name, no marker, just stones piled carefully, deliberately. He stood there staring at it, his heart pounding. Ray rode up behind him. "What is it?" Colt pointed. Ray dismounted and walked over, examining the grave. "How long's this been here?" "Don't know. Wasn't here last week." "You think it's, yeah." They stood there in silence, looking at the unmarked grave. Someone had brought Voss's body here. Someone had buried him on Colt's land, in the shadow of everything he'd tried to destroy. It was a message, a reminder, a warning. The fight might be over, but the consequences would never fully disappear. "What do you want to do?" Ray asked. Colt thought about it. Thought about digging it up, moving it, erasing this final insult. But what would be the point? "Leave it," he said finally. "It's just dirt and bones, can't hurt us now." They rode back to the ranch together, and Colt didn't tell Eliza about the grave. Some burdens didn't need to be shared. That night, he stood on the porch and looked out at the land. His land. Hard won and harder kept. Somewhere out there in the darkness was Voss's grave, a permanent scar on property that had seen too much blood. But it was still his, still theirs. And maybe that was enough. Spring came late that year, fighting its way through frost and mud before finally taking hold. Colt stood in the doorway of the new barn, watching green push its way up through dead grass, and realized he'd stopped looking over his shoulder. It had been 6 months since Voss died. 6 months since Colt found that grave on his property line. 6 months of waiting for the next disaster that never came. Life had a way of moving forward whether you were ready or not. "You planning to stand there all day?" Colt turned. Eliza was walking toward him from the house, her hair loose around her shoulders, a basket of laundry on her hip. She looked different these days, steadier, like some weight she'd been carrying had finally lifted. "Just thinking," he said. "About how quiet it is." She set down the basket and came to stand beside him. "Is that a bad thing?" "No, just strange. I'm not used to it." She slipped her hand into his. "Maybe you should get used to it. We've earned some peace." He squeezed her fingers. "Yeah, maybe we have." They stood there together, watching the land wake up. In the distance, Colt could see Ray and 2 of the newer hands moving cattle to fresh pasture. The herd had grown over the winter. They were up to almost 300 head now, more than Colt had ever managed alone. The ranch was thriving in ways he hadn't thought possible a year ago. "I need to get to the school," Eliza said, picking up her basket. "Mary Henderson's mother wants to talk about enrolling her other 2 children. That'll put you at what, 25 students? 27 if she brings both of them." Colt shook his head. "You're going to need a second teacher soon." "Already thinking about it. There's a woman in the next county who taught back east. I wrote to her last week." "You did all that without telling me?" Eliza smiled. "I'm telling you now." She kissed his cheek and headed toward the wagon. Colt watched her go, still amazed sometimes that she'd chosen this life. Chosen him. He went back to work on the barn, repairing a loose board in one of the stalls. The physical labor felt good, grounding. His hands knew what to do even when his mind wandered. He thought about Eliza's school, about how it had become the center of the community in ways neither of them had anticipated. Parents came from 20 miles around now, some moving their whole families closer just so their kids could attend. The town had grown because of it. New shops opening, new houses being built. Ashford was becoming something more than a dusty waypoint. It was becoming a real town. And Colt and Eliza were part of that. They'd planted roots here, deep ones, the kind that couldn't be easily torn up. He was still working when Ray found him an hour later. "Got something you should see," Ray said. Colt set down his hammer. "What is it?" Just come look." They walked out past the corrals to the north pasture. Ray pointed to a section of fence that had been repaired recently. "See anything different?" Colt studied it. The fence looked fine, post straight, wire tight. Then he saw it. Carved into one of the posts, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a name. D.V. Darren Voss. Colt felt his chest tighten. "When did this show up?" "Don't know. Could have been there for weeks. I just noticed it this morning." Colt ran his finger over the letters. They were crude but deliberate, carved deep into the wood. "You think one of his friends did it?" Ray asked. "Maybe. Or maybe he did it himself before everything went to hell." "What do you want to do about it?" Colt thought about it. He could replace the post, erase this final mark, pretend it had never been there. But that felt like running from a ghost. "Leave it," he said. "It's just a name, can't hurt anything." Ray looked skeptical but nodded. "All right, if you're sure." "I'm sure." They walked back toward the barn and Colt tried not to think about the carving. Tried not to imagine Voss out here alone, cutting his initials into fence posts like a kid claiming territory. It didn't matter. The man was dead and buried. His name on a post didn't change that. But it nagged at him anyway. That evening, Colt told Eliza about it over dinner. She set down her fork. "Do you think someone's trying to send you a message?" "I don't know. Maybe." "Should we be worried?" "No, it's been 6 months. If someone wanted revenge, they would have tried by now." She didn't look convinced. "Then why bring it up?" "Because I don't want there to be secrets between us. Not about this." Eliza reached across the table and took his hand. "There's a difference between secrets and protection. You don't have to tell me every little thing that might scare me." "Yes, I do. We're partners. That means sharing the bad with the good." She smiled slightly. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just trying not to make the same mistakes twice." They finished dinner in comfortable silence, and afterward Eliza went to grade papers while Colt sat on the porch with his coffee. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that made the whole world look softer than it was. He thought about the life they'd built here. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was theirs, made stronger by everything they'd survived. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Colt was saddling his horse when he heard the wagon coming up the road. He turned, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle on his saddle. But it wasn't trouble. It was Sheriff Wade. And he wasn't alone. Sitting beside him in the wagon was a woman Colt didn't recognize. Young, maybe 25, with dark hair and tired eyes. She held a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. "Morning, Reeves." "Wade, didn't expect to see you." "Yeah, well, got something that needs handling." He gestured to the woman. "This is Sarah Voss, Darren's sister." Colt went still. His sister. "That's right. She came to town last week looking for him. I had to tell her what happened." Sarah climbed down from the wagon, cradling the bundle. Now that she was closer, Colt could see she was holding a baby, maybe 3 or 4 months old. "I'm sorry to bother you," Sarah said quietly. "Sheriff Wade said you were the one who was there at the end." Colt didn't know what to say. "I was. I need to ask you something about my brother." "All right." Sarah shifted the baby in her arms. Did he suffer?" Colt thought about the last time he'd seen Voss alive, bloody and broken in that mine, eyes full of hate and fear. He thought about the deputy who'd shot him during transport, and whether it had been quick or slow. He could tell her the truth, could describe every ugly detail, but what good would that do? "No," he said instead. "It was fast. He didn't suffer." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." Wade stepped forward. "Sarah's been staying at the hotel in town, but she can't afford it much longer. I was hoping you might know of work around here. She's good with her hands. Used to run a boarding house back east." Colt looked at this woman, sister to the man who'd tried to destroy him, and felt something shift inside him. He could turn her away. Send her back to wherever she'd come from. Make her someone else's problem. But that's not who he wanted to be. "We could use help at the house," he heard himself say. "My wife runs a school, and she's always talking about needing extra hands. Room and board, plus fair wages." Sarah looked up, surprised. You do that? After what Darren did to you? You're not your brother. But my wife and I, we believe people deserve a chance to build something better. If you want that chance, it's yours. Sarah started crying in earnest then, clutching her baby close. I don't know what to say. Say yes or no. Everything else we can figure out. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Wade clapped Colt on the shoulder. You're a good man, Reeves. Don't know about that, just trying to do right. After Wade left, Colt brought Sarah to the house. Eliza was preparing for school when they walked in. She took one look at the woman and the baby, and her expression softened immediately. Who's this? Eliza, this is Sarah Voss. She's going to be helping around the house. Eliza's eyes widened slightly when she heard the last name, but she recovered quickly. Voss? Darren's sister, Sarah said quietly. I understand if you don't want me here. After what he did, you're not responsible for your brother's choices, Eliza said firmly. And we can always use help. Can you cook? Yes, ma'am. And clean, do laundry, whatever you need. Good. There's a room off the back of the house. It's small, but it's warm and dry. You and your baby can stay there. Sarah looked like she might cry again. Thank you, both of you. Eliza showed her to the room, and Colt heard them talking, practical things about meals and schedules and what the baby needed. When Eliza came back out, she pulled Colt aside. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. No, but it feels right. What if she causes trouble? Then we deal with it. But I don't think she will. She's just trying to survive, same as everyone else. Eliza studied his face. You've changed. Have I? The Colt I met a year ago wouldn't have taken in the sister of the man who tried to kill him. The Colt from a year ago didn't have you teaching him how to be better. She kissed him then, soft and slow, and Colt felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest. Sarah fit into their lives easier than Colt expected. She was quiet and hardworking, never asking for more than she was given. She took over the cooking and most of the household chores, freeing up Eliza to focus on the school. The baby, a little girl named Clara, brought an unexpected lightness to the house. Colt found himself stopping his work sometimes just to watch Sarah sing to her or to see Eliza making faces to get her to smile. It reminded him that life wasn't just about surviving. It was about these small moments of joy that snuck up when you weren't looking. One evening, about 2 weeks after Sarah arrived, she asked to speak with Colt privately. They sat on the porch while Eliza and the baby were inside. I need to tell you something, Sarah said, about Darren. Colt waited. He wasn't always like he was at the end. When we were kids, he was. He was good, protected me from our father, made sure I had enough to eat. But something happened to him after he left home. The war, maybe, or just the hardness of the world. By the time I saw him again years later, he was different, angry, mean. You don't have to explain him to me. Might. I know. But I want you to understand what he did to you, it wasn't personal. He would have done it to anyone. He was so eaten up by hate that he couldn't see anything else. Colt thought about that. Doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't, but maybe it makes it a little more understandable. Maybe. Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. There's something else. The deputy who shot him, it wasn't self-defense. Colt went very still. How do you know that? Because the deputy told me. When I went to identify the body, he was drunk, felt guilty. Said someone paid him to do it. He wouldn't say who, but... She met Colt's eyes. I think you can guess. Colt's mind raced. Someone had paid to have Voss killed. Someone who wanted him silenced permanently. Did you tell Wade? No. What's the point? Darren's dead either way, and whoever paid for it, they had their reasons. To my... Mom. She paused. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. What you do with it is up to you. Colt sat there long after Sarah went inside, staring out at the dark land. Someone had killed Voss. Maybe one of his enemies. Maybe one of his so-called friends who didn't want him talking. Maybe even someone in Ashford who decided justice needed a helping hand. Colt would probably never know for sure. And after thinking about it for a long time, he realized he didn't need to. Voss was gone. The threat was over. Knowing who pulled the trigger wouldn't change anything. Some questions didn't need answers. The months rolled on, each one bringing new challenges and small victories. The ranch expanded. The school grew. Sarah became part of the household, and little Clara became everyone's favorite distraction. Colt and Eliza fell into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. Work during the day, dinner together in the evening, quiet conversations on the porch before bed. They argued sometimes, usually about small things like whether to buy more cattle or invest in better equipment. But the arguments never lasted long, and they always ended the same way, with both of them remembering what they'd survived to get here. One night in late summer, Colt woke to find Eliza standing at the window, wrapped in a quilt. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She turned. "Just thinking." About? About how different everything is from a year ago. I came here expecting, I don't know, a practical arrangement, a safe place to restart my life. And instead you got a war. And instead I got you. She came back to bed and curled up against him. I got a partner, a home, a purpose, things I didn't even know I was looking for. Colt wrapped his arms around her. I got the same. They lay there in the darkness, and Colt felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just contentment, but actual peace. The kind that came from knowing you'd built something that would last. "I want to tell you something," Eliza said after a while. "What?" "I'm pregnant." Colt went completely still. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I've been sick in the mornings for 2 weeks, and I'm late." He pulled back to look at her face. In the moonlight, he could see she was smiling. "How do you feel about it, Ma?" he asked. "Terrified. Excited, both at the same time." "Yeah, me too." They held each other, and Colt felt tears on his cheeks, though he couldn't say when they'd started falling. A baby. They were going to have a baby. The news spread through the household quickly. Sarah was overjoyed, immediately taking over more of the heavy work to keep Eliza from straining herself. Ray and the hands were congratulatory but awkward, offering gruff well-wishes before escaping back to the safety of ranch work. The whole town seemed to celebrate when word got out. Women stopped by with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Men clapped Colt on the back and told him to enjoy sleep while he still could. Even Mrs. Miller showed up with a hand-knitted blanket and a knowing smile. "You two are building something special here," she said. "A family, a community. That's worth more than all the land in the territory." Colt thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. He'd spent so many years focused on the ranch, on making it successful, on proving he could carve out a place in this hard country. But what he'd really been building all along was this: a life worth living. People worth caring about, a future that extended beyond his own survival. Winter came again, and with it a hard freeze that tested everything they'd built. Pipes froze. Cattle needed constant tending. The school had to close for 2 weeks when snow made the roads impassable. But they weathered it, together. Eliza's belly grew round, and Colt found himself constantly worrying about her health, about the baby, about whether he'd be a good father. She'd laugh at his worrying and tell him to relax, that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. But he couldn't help it. She'd become his whole world, and the thought of anything happening to her made his chest tight with fear. The baby came on a clear March morning, arriving early and angry about it. Colt paced in the main room while Sarah and the midwife from town worked in the bedroom. Every cry from Eliza sent him toward the door, only to have Sarah block his path and tell him to be patient. He'd faced down armed men without flinching, but this was different. This was waiting helplessly while the person he loved most endured pain he couldn't stop. Finally, after what felt like years but was probably only a few hours, he heard it. A baby crying. Sarah opened the door, her face glowing. "It's a boy, and he's perfect." Colt stumbled into the room. Eliza was propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced creature that was screaming its lungs out. "Come meet your son," Eliza said, her voice hoarse. Colt approached slowly, almost afraid to get too close. The baby was so small, so fragile-looking. "You can hold him," Eliza said. "I'll drop him." "No, you won't." She placed the baby in his arms, and Colt froze. The The child weighed almost nothing, and he was terrified of holding him wrong, of hurting him somehow. But then the baby opened his eyes, impossibly blue, and looked directly at Colt. And everything changed. All the fear, all the doubt, all the questions about whether he was ready for this, it all fell away. Because in that moment, holding his son, Colt understood something fundamental. This was what it had all been for. Every sacrifice, every fight, every hard decision. It had been building toward this moment. Toward this tiny person who hadn't asked to be born but deserved everything Colt could give him. "What should we name him?" Eliza asked. Colt thought about his father, about the name he'd carried his whole life. "James," he said. "After my father, if that's all right with you." "James Reeves," Eliza smiled. "I like it." They sat there together, Colt, Eliza, and little James, while outside the spring sun melted the last of the winter snow. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing worth having ever was. There were droughts that tested their water reserves and their patience. Cattle prices fluctuated wildly, making some years profitable and others barely break even. Colt broke his leg in a fall from a horse and spent 2 frustrating months unable to work. Eliza's school kept growing until they had to build an entirely new building to hold everyone. She hired 3 more teachers, including the woman from the next county she'd written to years ago. The school became known throughout the territory as one of the best, drawing families from hundreds of miles away. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and asked more questions than any human should be capable of asking. 2 years after he was born, they had a daughter, Eleanor, named after Eliza's mother. She was quieter than her brother, but just as stubborn. Sarah stayed with them, becoming more family than employee. She eventually married one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named Thomas, who treated her and Clara like they'd hung the moon. Ray got older but refused to retire, insisting he'd work until he dropped dead in the saddle. Colt stopped arguing with him about it. The ranch grew to over 2,000 acres. The herd topped 500 head. Colt hired more men, built more structures, turned the place into one of the most successful operations in the territory. But the success didn't matter as much as he'd thought it would. What mattered was coming home to Eliza's laugh. What mattered was James and Eleanor running to meet him when he rode in from work. What mattered was sitting on the porch in the evening with his family around him, watching the sun set over a land that had tried to break them and failed. One evening, almost 10 years after Eliza had first stepped off that train, Colt found himself back at Ashford Station. He was picking up supplies that had come in by rail, loading them into his wagon while the evening train prepared to depart. He watched passengers boarding, people heading east, people heading west, all of them looking for something better than what they were leaving behind. He thought about the man he'd been when he'd stood on this platform waiting for a woman he'd never met. How uncertain he'd been. How closed off. How wrong he'd been about what his life would become. "Papa!" He turned. Eliza was walking toward him with James and Eleanor, all of them bundled against the cool evening air. She'd taken the kids to town for some reason, probably to spoil them with candy they didn't need. "I thought you were going straight home," Colt said. "We were, but then Eleanor said she wanted to see the trains." Eliza smiled. "And I thought we might find you here." James ran up and grabbed Colt's hand. "Did you see it, Papa? The locomotive is huge. I saw it. Can we ride on it someday?" "Maybe. When you're older." Eleanor tugged on his other hand. "Tell us the story again." "What story?" "About when you met Mama, when she came on the train." Colt looked at Eliza over their children's heads. She was smiling, that same quiet smile she'd had when she first stepped off the train all those years ago. "It was a night just like this one," he began, and his kids settled in to hear a story they'd heard a dozen times but never tired of. He told them about the cold, about the empty platform, about how their mother had stepped off the train looking like she owned the whole territory, even though she'd never been there before. He told them about building the ranch together, about starting the school, about all the small victories that had seemed impossible at the time, but were now just part of their history. He didn't tell them about Voss. They were too young for that story. Maybe someday, when they were older, he'd explain that the life they had wasn't given, it was fought for. But not tonight. Tonight was for remembering the good things, the things that had made all the fighting worthwhile. When he finished, Eleanor asked her inevitable question. "And then what happened?"
And then we lived happily ever after, James said, rolling his eyes. He was getting to the age where he thought he was too old for fairy tales. Not quite, Eliza corrected gently. We lived, sometimes happily, sometimes not, but always together. That's better than any fairy tale. James looked skeptical, but Eleanor nodded like this made perfect sense. They loaded into the wagon and headed home, the kids chattering in the back while Colt drove. Eliza sat beside him, her hand resting on his leg. "You thinking about that night?" she asked quietly. "How'd you know?" "Because I was thinking about it too. How scared I was. How certain I'd made a terrible mistake." "And did you?" She squeezed his leg. "Ask me again in another 10 years. He smiled. "I will." The ranch came into view as the last light faded from the sky. Lights glowed in the windows. Sarah would have dinner ready soon. Smoke rose from the chimney,
And Colt could see Ray and the hands heading toward the bunkhouse after a long day's work. It looked like home, not because of the buildings or the land, but because of the people in it, the family they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. As they pulled up to the house, Colt thought about that grave on the north property line. He'd had the fence post replaced years ago, erasing Voss's carved initials. But he'd left the grave itself alone, a reminder that the past never fully disappeared. It just got absorbed into everything that came after. That's how healing worked, not by forgetting, but by building something stronger than what tried to break you. James and Eleanor jumped down from the wagon and ran inside, already arguing about who got to help set the table. Eliza climbed down more slowly, stretching after the ride. Colt came around and took her hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For taking a chance on a stranger, for building this life with me, for making me better than I was." Eliza reached up and touched his face. "We made each other better. That's how it works." She kissed him and headed inside, leaving him standing there in the gathering dark. Colt looked out at the land one more time. Tomorrow there'd be work to do. Fences to mend, cattle to move, 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. There'd be new challenges and old problems wearing new faces. But tonight, right now, everything was exactly as it should be. He'd spent so many years believing that strength meant standing alone, that asking for help was weakness, that love made you vulnerable in ways that would get you killed. Eliza had taught him something different. She'd taught him that real strength came from connection, that the things you built with others lasted longer than anything you built alone. That love didn't make you weak, it made you worth fighting for. The frontier was changing. Rail lines spread like veins across the territory. Towns grew into cities. Laws became more than just suggestions. The wild, lawless days were ending, but some things stayed the same. The land was still hard, life was still a fight, and the choices you made still mattered more than the hand you were dealt. Colt had started with nothing, just anger and determination and a piece of land nobody else wanted. He could have stayed that way, bitter and alone, fighting the world until it finally broke him. Instead, he'd taken a chance on a letter from a stranger, had opened his life to someone who saw possibilities where he only saw problems. And that one choice had changed everything. He turned and walked inside, where his family was waiting, where dinner was on the table and children were laughing and his wife was telling Sarah about her plans to expand the school again. This was his legacy, not the acres or the cattle or the buildings that would eventually crumble, but this warmth, this love, this evidence that two people could take broken pieces and build something whole. Years later, when Colt was old and his children had children of their own, they'd ask him about those early days, about what it was like to carve a life out of nothing. And he'd tell them the truth, that it was brutal and beautiful, that it nearly destroyed him more times than he could count, that there were nights he wasn't sure he'd live to see morning. But he'd also tell them about a woman who stepped off a train on a frozen night and changed the course of his entire life. About how the hardest things he'd ever done became his greatest achievements. About how the storm that almost broke him was the exact thing that made him strong enough to build something that would last. Because that's what survival really meant. Not just enduring, but transforming. Not just holding on, but creating something worth holding on to. The frontier had tested them with everything it had. fire and violence and fear and loss. They'd answered back with something stronger: love, partnership, the stubborn refusal to give up on each other or the life they were building. And in the end, that made all the difference. Colt closed the door behind him, shutting out the night. Inside, his family was waiting. Outside, the land stretched on forever, marked by the lives of everyone who'd fought to claim it. And somewhere in between those two truths was the story of how two strangers became partners, how partners became family, and how family became the only thing that mattered when everything else fell away. That was the legacy worth leaving. Not perfection, but perseverance. Not a fairy tale, but something real. Something built one choice at a time, one day at a time, one moment of courage at a time. Something that would outlast the stone and wood and iron they'd used to mark their presence on this earth. Because in the end, what survived wasn't the buildings or the boundaries. It was the love that had built them. And that was enough.